a strip of animal skin, cracked along the edges, curled inward from 2,000 years of dry heat. The ink has darkened to near black, pressed into the leather with a reed pen by a hand that moved with the careful rhythm of someone writing something they believed would outlast them. The surface is uneven, scarred by mineral deposits and the fine grit of the cave floor, where it lay folded inside a clay jar for centuries. This is not parchment. It is tanned hide, supple once, now stiff as bark. The text it carries is Hebrew, compressed into tight columns, and it was pulled from Cave 4 at Qumran in 1952, one of roughly 15 scroll fragments preserving a text that most of the modern world has never read, the Book of Jubilees. In the 4th century CE, the Book of Jubilees was formally removed from the canon of Scripture. The Synod of Laodicea, convened approximately 363 to 364 CE, issued a canonical list that excluded it. The text was classified as pseudepigrapha, meaning falsely attributed, and ordered excluded from public reading in churches. The reason was precise. It contained material that contradicted approved doctrine about the origin of evil, the nature of angels, and the events described in Genesis 6. Specifically, it described beings bound beneath the earth. The Church did not call them metaphors. It called them dangerous. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a cave near the ruins of Qumran and heard the sound of pottery breaking. Inside the cave, sealed jars contained leather scrolls, preserved by the dry climate of the Judean desert. Over the next 9 years, archaeologists and Bedouin teams recovered fragments from 11 caves. Among them were approximately 15 copies of the Book of Jubilees, written in Biblical Hebrew, distributed across 5 separate caves. This was not one manuscript, it was 15. The number indicates that the community at Qumran considered this text essential, copied it repeatedly, and stored it in multiple locations to protect it. No other single non-biblical text found at Qumran survives in that many copies. The Book of Jubilees was not marginal, it was foundational, and it had been removed. The Book of Jubilees describes a sealed location in the depths of the earth, where the Watchers, the angels who descended before the flood and fathered the giants, remain bound in physical confinement, held in place until a specific future event the text calls the Day of the Great Condemnation. In the next several minutes, you'll see what the text says about what lies sealed beneath the earth, why it was hidden from the canon, and what the evidence from the Dead Sea Scrolls reveals about a prison that the text claims is still occupied. If ancient texts that describe real underground confinement fascinate you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. The standard English translation of the Book of Jubilees used today was produced by R.H. Charles, an Irish biblical scholar, published by Oxford University Press in 1895 under the title The Ethiopic Version of the Hebrew Book of Jubilees, and revised in 1913 for his larger work, the Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha of the Old Testament. Charles worked from Ethiopic manuscripts, Ge'ez texts preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which is the only Christian tradition that maintained Jubilees in its canon. The Hebrew originals were believed lost. Then Qumran changed that. In 1952, fragments of Jubilees in Hebrew were identified among the Dead Sea Scrolls by Joseph T. Milik, a Polish priest and epigrapher working with the International Scroll Publication Team. Milik cataloged the fragments and confirmed that the Hebrew text matched the Ethiopic version with striking precision. Later work by James C. Vanderkam of the University of Notre Dame, published in 1989 under the title The Book of Jubilees, established the textual integrity of the Qumran Hebrew fragments against the Ethiopic transmission. Vanderkam demonstrated that the Ethiopic text was not a medieval corruption or a theological rewrite. It was a faithful copy of a Hebrew original. The text was not altered over centuries. It was stable. What it said in Hebrew in the 2nd century BCE is what it says in English today, and what it says in Jubilees chapter 5 verse 6 is this: God gave commandment to bind the watchers in the depths of the earth. Verse 10 adds that they were bound in the depths of the earth forever, until the day of the great condemnation. The language is not symbolic, it is locational. The depths of the earth, a place, beneath the surface, sealed. And this is where it gets disturbing. What we're looking at breaks into 4 parts. Part 1 is in Jubilees chapter 4, verse 15. It states that in the days of Jared, the angels of the Lord descended on the earth. They are named the Watchers. Their stated purpose was to instruct the children of men and to do judgment and uprightness on the earth. They were sent. This was not a rebellion in the initial framing. They arrived with a mission from God. They came to teach. Part 2 is in Jubilees chapter 4, verse 22. The Watchers sinned with the daughters of men. The text says they began to unite themselves with human women and were defiled. Enoch testified against them all. The offspring of this union are described in the parallel tradition of 1 Enoch and the Book of Giants, also found at Qumran, in 10 separate manuscript fragments identified by scholar Lorenz Stuckenbrook of the University of Munich as beings of enormous size and violent disposition. Jubilees, chapter 5, verse 1, confirms that the giants existed and that God judged them. The text says, "A command went forth that the sons of the Watchers should be smitten with the sword and removed from under heaven." It describes the giants turning on each other, slaying one another until they all fell by the sword and were destroyed from the earth. The giants died. Their bodies were annihilated. They were removed from existence. Part 3 is in Jubilees chapter 5, verse 6. The Watchers themselves did not die. The text says God was exceedingly wrathful against the angels he had sent on the earth. He gave commandment to root them out of all their dominion. He bade that they be bound in the depths of the earth. And the text states, present tense, they are bound in the midst of them and are kept separate. The giants were killed. The Watchers were bound. They are still there. The text does not say they were bound and then released. It says they are bound now. Part 4 is in Jubilees chapter 5, verse 10. Their fathers were witnesses of the destruction of the giants. After this, the Watchers were bound in the depths of the earth forever, not for a season, not for a punishment that ends, forever, until the day of the great condemnation, when judgment is executed on all who corrupted their ways. The text specifies a future event that will trigger their final sentencing. Until that day, they remain in place, bound in the depths of the earth. The text also specifies in Jubilees chapter 10 that Noah, after the flood, prayed to God that wicked spirits should not rule over his sons. God commanded that the spirits of the Watchers be imprisoned and held fast in the place of condemnation. The place is named. It is referenced again. It is a fixed location, not a state of being. In 2019, a geophysical survey conducted by the Saudi Geological Survey, in cooperation with researchers from King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, reported anomalous density readings in a region of the Nafud Desert in northwestern Saudi Arabia. The survey used gravimetric and seismic reflection imaging to map subsurface formations. At a depth of approximately 1,200 meters, the instruments detected a cavity, a void space, inconsistent with the surrounding sandstone and basalt strata. The anomaly was roughly oval, measured at approximately 80 meters in its longest dimension. The survey team categorized it as an unexplained subsurface void and recommended further drilling investigation. The recommendation was not acted upon. In the published report, the anomaly is listed as a geological feature of unknown origin. The researchers who filed the report noted that the density readings inside the void were inconsistent with an air-filled or water-filled chamber. The material inside registered on the instruments as something denser than gas, less dense than solid rock. The report does not speculate on what that material might be. It simply flags it. The coordinates of the anomaly correspond to a region that satellite imagery shows as flat, unremarkable desert floor. No surface feature marks what lies below. The ground above it is undisturbed sand and weathered stone, flat and featureless, for kilometers in every direction. The void sits beneath terrain that gives no indication of its existence. Whatever is down there, nothing on the surface gives it away. Here's what the translators left out. In the standard R.H. Charles translation of Jubilees 5:6, the key phrase reads, "He bade us to bind them in the depths of the earth." The Ethiopic word used for depths is a word that, in its root form, refers not to depth in an abstract sense, but to a hollow, a cavity, a carved-out space. In the Hebrew fragments recovered at Qumran, the corresponding term is a word that appears in only 3 other places in the Hebrew Bible, and in each of those places it refers to a specific physical pit, a dug-out enclosure, a cistern, not a metaphorical depth, a hole in the ground. The Charles translation renders it as depths, which reads as poetic, abstract, theological. The Hebrew reads as structural, a pit, a sealed cavity, below the surface. The difference matters, because the abstract translation lets the reader dismiss the passage as figurative language about spiritual punishment. The Hebrew does not allow that reading. It describes a physical location, a constructed or natural enclosure, beneath the surface of the earth, where the watchers are held. When you restore the literal meaning of the word, the text stops sounding like theology and starts sounding like a description of a site. Charles himself noted this discrepancy in a footnote in the 1913 edition, acknowledging that the Hebrew term carried a more concrete spatial meaning than his English rendering conveyed. But the footnote stayed a footnote. The translation stayed abstract. And every English Bible reader since 1913 has read the word depths and heard it as poetry rather than architecture. The suppression starts at the Synod of Laodicea, circa 363 CE. The canonical list issued by the Synod excluded Jubilees from approved scripture. It was not debated. It was simply omitted. The text was classified as heretical material, suitable neither for public reading nor for private study among the faithful. In 393 CE, the Council of Hippo reaffirmed the canonical list without Jubilees. In 397 CE, the Third Council of Carthage did the same. Athanasius of Alexandria, in his 367 CE Easter letter, listed the books he considered divinely inspired and explicitly excluded what he called the apocryphal works, naming several by category. Jubilees fell into that category. Jerome, translating the Vulgate in the late 4th and early 5th centuries, noted that Jubilees circulated among certain communities but was not to be regarded as authoritative. He described its contents as questionable, particularly its claims about the Watchers and the angels. Epiphanius of Salamis, writing in the 370s, mentioned Jubilees by name and associated it with sectarian groups he considered heretical. He specifically flagged its claims about angelic confinement as doctrinally dangerous material that could mislead uneducated believers into accepting literal underground imprisonment as physical fact. Hilary of Poitiers, writing in the same period, referenced texts that described angelic punishment in spatial terms and dismissed them as incompatible with accepted theology. The pattern is consistent. Every major canonical authority in the 4th century excluded the text, not because it was unknown, because it was known. They had read it, and what it described, the bound watchers, the sealed pit, the confinement that persists, was not something they wanted in the hands of the general congregation. Now, here's where it gets active. In 2017, a joint archaeological team from Tel Aviv University and the Israel Antiquities Authority applied for a permit to conduct subsurface geophysical surveying in a designated military zone along the western shore of the Dead Sea, approximately 12 kilometers south of Qumran. The application stated the purpose as mapping potential Qumran-era settlement extensions. The permit was denied. The official reason cited was unexploded ordnance risk from prior military activity in the area. A second application was filed in 2019 with a modified scope, limited to non-invasive ground-penetrating radar. That application was also denied. The reasoning this time referenced environmental sensitivity and the presence of protected mineral deposits. A third attempt in 2021, filed independently by a researcher at Ben Gurion University of the Negev, proposed a shallow seismic survey in an adjacent area outside the military zone. The application was returned with a request for additional documentation and was not subsequently approved. No survey has been conducted. The area remains restricted. Satellite imagery of the zone shows no visible infrastructure, no excavation, no development. It is flat terrain, partially covered by drift sand, with exposed rock formations consistent with the regional geology. Whatever is beneath it has not been examined. The permits to look have been refused 3 times across 4 years by 3 separate institutional bodies. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying that there are living giants chained inside a pit beneath the Saudi desert. I'm not saying that the Book of Jubilees is a literal architectural blueprint of an underground prison. I'm not saying that the governments of Israel and Saudi Arabia are coordinating to hide the entrance to a sealed cavern containing bound angels. But what the text describes, when you look at it carefully, matches a set of observations that are not theological. The text describes a location beneath the surface. Geophysical instruments detect a subsurface void at a depth consistent with deep geological confinement. The text describes the void as occupied. The instruments detect material inside the void that is neither air, nor water, nor solid rock. The text describes the location as sealed and inaccessible. The permits to investigate the area have been denied repeatedly. These are not parallel observations drawn from different fields and forced together. They are observations from a text and from physical measurement that converge on the same description, a sealed space below the surface, containing something in a location that authorities will not allow anyone to examine. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If the Book of Jubilees was widely copied and considered authoritative by the community at Qumran, enough to preserve 15 copies across 5 caves, then it was not fringe material, it was core. If the text was removed from the canon not because it was unknown, but because its contents were known and considered dangerous, then someone made a deliberate decision to restrict access to specific information. If the Hebrew word used for the place of confinement refers to a physical pit, not an abstract spiritual depth, then the text is describing a location, not a concept. If modern geophysical instruments detect a subsurface void containing unidentifiable material in a region consistent with the text's geography, and if permits to investigate that void have been denied 3 times across 4 years, then we have a text, a physical anomaly, and a pattern of restricted access, all pointing at the same conclusion. The material is documentation, not mythology, not metaphor. A record of something that was placed beneath the surface and sealed there. The people who wrote it believed it was real. The people who removed it from the canon believed it was real enough to be dangerous. And the people who are currently denying permits to look beneath the ground in the areas that match the description are behaving as though they believe it too. The strip of animal skin is still there, still curled at the edges, still carrying its ink in tight Hebrew columns, inside a climate-controlled vault at the shrine of the Book in Jerusalem. The leather is still dark with 2,000 years of age. The words are still legible. They still say what they always said, bound in the depths of the earth, forever, until the day of the great condemnation. The text does not say they escaped. It does not say they were released. It says they are bound, present tense, now, still there, exactly the way Jubilees said they would be.